Today on Commotion.
Sufjan Stevens has this amazing ability to translate big feelings into songs. His latest album, Javelin, is dedicated to his late partner. You'll hear how it honors grief, love, and the big relationships in your life.
My burning
Commotion, this morning at 11:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app. The CBC News is next. Coming up in an hour, it's Q.
The Canadian author Ian Reid wrote a novel called Foe about a young couple who's confronted with a dilemma when one member of the relationship is being sent into space. That novel has been turned into a major Hollywood film, and Ian Reid will be here to tell you all about it.
This is the CBC Edmonton News. At 9 o'clock, it's -6 in Edmonton. Good morning, I'm Ken Dawson. Here's what's making news this hour. As it warned over the weekend, the Israeli military is stepping up its missile strikes on Hamas sites in Gaza. More than 300 missiles were fired into Gaza overnight at the same time as Western leaders were reaffirming their support for Israel. U.S. President Joe Biden has released a statement after speaking with Canada, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. The statement reiterates their belief that Israel has the right to defend itself. Peter Armstrong has more from Washington.
In a lot of ways, this statement from these leaders gives us one more sign that this next phase is about to begin. We've been watching and waiting for some kind of a ground offensive in Gaza. The Israeli military has been telling its own troops amassed along the border to prepare for what it calls an invasion of Gaza. So a statement like this from key Western allies certainly feels like another sign that these next hours or days are crucial. But the unprecedented nature of the attack by Hamas means the response by Israel itself will be unprecedented as well. So Western leaders have been working the phones and issuing statements to try to keep this contained. There are very real concerns that this conflict could widen. So in its way, this statement is also about buying time to get aid in and hostages out, but also time to work with allies to keep whatever this next phase is going to be from spilling over into a broader, more regional conflict. Peter Armstrong, CBC News, Washington.
Groups representing downtown Edmonton residents and businesses say things have been improving when it comes to crime and social disorder. Alex Haritsu is the chair of the Downtown Revitalization Committee. She says progress has been slow, but that increased police presence and the return of beat cops to the area has been helpful.
And so we've just seen a lot more engagement between our small businesses and beat cops, and I think that's really important. That's like what community policing is all about. It's not only about enforcement. Sometimes it's just about the visibility and presence of having law enforcement on the streets.
Last week, during a report to the Edmonton Police Commission, EPS said they are aware that the increased policing efforts downtown are pushing some crimes to other parts of the city. The mayor of Cochrane says residents need to conserve water to limit the amount of wastewater seeping into the Bow River. The sewer line broke Saturday while construction crews were working in the area. Since then, a significant amount of water and wastewater has flowed into the Bow. Cochrane Mayor Jeff Janung says once the sun comes up, they'll be able to see whether they've managed to stop the flow as they work to fix the problem.
We've asked our community to really conserve water, and it's not around the water quality is why we're asking for the conservation. As you can imagine, you turn your tap on or do a load of laundry, that sends wastewater down the pipe, so that's the reason for it, just to really restrict the flow in that pipe.
Both the town of Cochrane and the city of Calgary downstream say water remains safe to drink. The town has also asked some of its larger water users to help in conservation efforts. A Southern Alberta First Nation is planting rows and rows of trees as a way to fight climate change. CBC's Stephanie Cram brings us more in the story.
It never used to get this windy.
That's Eldon Weaselchild, a Siksika Nation knowledge keeper. He says more trees will help his community combat climate change. Siksika is planting shelter belts. They are rows of trees that serve as natural wind barriers. According to Colin LaRock from the University of Saskatchewan School of Agriculture, they also help fight drought by trapping snow during windy winter days.
We need that soil to start the crop off in the spring.
And where did you get the spring moisture before the kind of summer rains come is usually with the melting snow.
Shelter belts aren't new to Canada. A now defunct national program was created in 1903 to attract farmers to the prairies. But First Nations were excluded because of a technicality. Reserve land is owned by the Crown. Today, the community is changing that. They planted the first seedlings of their new shelter belts. By next spring, about 180,000 seedlings, or 50 kilometers of shelter belts, will be planted. Stephanie Cram, CBC News, Siksika Nation.
Taking a look at weather, periods of snow continuing today, only up to -3 for a high. The flurries should taper off this evening, dropping down to -9 overnight. Cloudy tomorrow, a high of -5. The sun returns on Wednesday with a high of -4. Thursday, cloudy and -3. Currently in Edmonton, it's -6.
Hello, I'm Matt Galloway in Vancouver, and you're listening to The Current. As we heard before the news, teens, parents, and practitioners are facing a difficult task in navigating the opioid drug crisis in British Columbia. Jennifer Whiteside is the Minister for Mental Health and Addictions in BC. Minister Whiteside, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
We heard a word used a couple of times by Dania Fast in the last half hour in talking about the situation. She called the fact that unregulated drugs are the leading cause of unnatural death for youth in your province for a series of years terrifying. Do you find this terrifying?
There is no question that we are seeing a very, very troubling increase in mortality associated with the toxic drug crisis in British Columbia affecting youth, and that is a top priority for work that we're doing in my ministry and across our healthcare system.
So this is, as I said, the leading cause of unnatural death for youth in your province. From 2017 through 2022, 19 teens have died already this year alone. We know the number of deaths from the coroner's report, but what do we know about the scale of the problem in terms of how many young people are struggling with addictions and have overdosed but have survived?
I think when we look at how the numbers are increasing, we certainly, that says to us that there are some very serious challenges that youth are dealing with, and that is why we have been working with folks like Dr. Wang and Dr. Fast, with our school system, with our Ministry of Children and Family Development, to develop interventions and to create more access for youth to be able to get the kind of support that they need, where and when they need it.
Well, one of the challenges that young people are facing is access to care. In August of 2020, your government promised 123 substance use treatment beds for youth. 3 years later, there's just a fraction of those beds provided. Where are the beds?
Yeah, and that is, that's a really, interesting discussion that Dr. Fast and Dr. Wang were having with respect to, our treatment beds. What role do treatment beds play in the whole system that we need for youth? And what we have seen is that in some areas, we actually have beds available, but we don't see uptake of those beds. We don't see those beds being used, and that is a point that something that we really need to understand. Those different sort of modalities of care, different points of access for care, and the point that Dr. Wang and Dr. Fast were making around listening to youth and listening to what it is that they need. That is so critical in all of this.
But just to be clear, your government promised 123 beds. There are 32 beds that are available. Why is the delay happening? Where are the rest of those beds?
Well, we have 166 youth substance beds in health authorities across the entire province, and in terms of the scaling up of those beds, we're working with health authorities and with providers to increase the number of beds, but we also really have to look at utilization of beds, and we really have to look at the kinds of upstream supports and the upstream access points that youth need as well. So, for example, one of the programs that we're expanding across the province is the Foundry, which is a very sort of low barrier access to mental health and primary care services for youth that involve not only access to counseling, to harm reduction services, to primary care physicians where they can have some other issues addressed, like sexual health needs, etc. And those centers are really integrated with our healthcare system and provide a point of access, and also provide some peer support for youth to really try to meet them where they're at.
In the absence of those beds that were promised, we asked your ministry for wait time data, and they said they don't have the data. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, Matt, that's a challenge that mental health systems have across the country.
Sorry, but just to be clear, do you know? Just to be clear, do you know how long people have to wait for a treatment bed?
That's work that we're doing with health authorities right now to understand what the wait times are in the system. We have a system not only in British Columbia, I'd say across the country, where mental health has not really until recently been considered to be part of our healthcare system writ large. And so some of those systems that we rely on, and those processes for collecting data that we rely on in our healthcare system, they don't exist. So that's work that we're doing to scale up and to be able to better understand and communicate to the public where they can go for help.
Let me ask you about the issue of decriminalization. BC has been piloting decriminalization of small amounts of certain illegal drugs for almost a year now. This doesn't apply to youth under 19, and there are advocates who have raised concerns saying that this excludes young people from a harm reduction policy. What are the impacts of that, do you think, on young people in particular?
Well, I think, Matt, that that's one of the issues that we'll learn about as we go through. We're still really in the very early days of decriminalization, and we're doing a lot of work with communities to ensure that we have the right kinds of supports in place, and that we have the right kinds of processes attached to that program. But I would when it comes to how they can identify where there is a service that they can go to, we need to be continuing the work with our healthcare system, with our school system, with the Ministry of Children and Family Development, to make sure that kids and families have those access points. 73% of the youth who died in the time period of the coroner's report in British Columbia had a connection point with the Ministry of Children and Family Development. So that tells us a lot about where we and how we need to be focusing efforts. Those relationships that Dr. Fast talked about and Dr. Wang talked about, those relationships that are built, that start to create trust for youth in a system of care are really, really critical to being able to connect them with the kind of care and support that they need.
Would your government support the creation of supervised youth consumption sites?
I think we have to look at all of the harm reduction opportunities. We have to take the advice of doctors like Dr. Fast to ensure that we're providing the right kinds of services for youth and connecting them to the right kind of care. I mean, we've heard about the success of connecting kids to opioid agonist therapy. That can be a life-saving path towards to treatment. So all of those, we have to look at everything. We have to look at every single tool in the toolbox in order to try to turn the dial on this crisis.
There have been concerns raised by parents and practitioners around the diversion of safe supply opioids like hydromorphone ending up in the hands of teens. Your ministry has said there are 4,000 safe supply hydromorphone prescriptions. The coroner, Lisa Lapointe, has said that the idea of this supply being diverted into the hands of teens is an urban myth. Is it an urban myth that hydromorphone is being diverted into the hands of teenagers in British Columbia?
Matt, I think that at all kind of in all times there has been a tendency among some folks to misuse prescriptions. I think what's important to note here is that in the 142 deaths that are the subject of the coroner's report, hydromorphone was found in 12 of them, or 8%. And in many of those cases, there were other substances as well found in the cases that the coroner looked at. So I would say that how we dealt with hydromorphone prescribing in the context of the COVID pandemic, when there were significant efforts made to try and ensure that we mitigated the impact of the public health orders related to COVID, so that we could try to keep people connected to care and connected with medications that they needed through the Safer Supply program. That is, we're reviewing that. The provincial health officer is, reviewing how we transition that now to a different state now that we're not in the midst of the pandemic anymore. But I would say we always have to be careful about diversion in every circumstance.
When doctors say that they're finding 8-milligram tablets diverted from Safe Supply, that they're widely available on the street, what is your reaction? Are those doctors, do you believe those doctors what they're saying?
Well, I think that we have to be just careful, because we also know that there is a market for fake hydromorphone tablets, and we in this regard really rely on the relationships that we have with law enforcement, and we work very closely with law enforcement across the province to make sure that we're tracking and monitoring what's happening in this regard, and we have not heard this concern expressed from law enforcement in different parts of the province.
Just before I let you go, it was 7 years ago that the public health emergency was declared in British Columbia, and thousands of people have died in the province since then, but we're now seeing kids die. And I think, I'll use that word again, there are a lot of parents and people who are in the healthcare world who would say that this is terrifying, what they're seeing right now. What gives you the confidence? Well, you admit that it's terrifying. What gives you the confidence that this can be turned around?
Well, in part, Matt, it's because I see the incredible work being done every day by doctors, by nurses, by street out work nurses, by peers, by people in community who are doing everything that they can to help us figure out how we build up a system of care, how we provide better access to youth for the care that they need. And so all of this work that we're doing through building up Foundry, providing better access to primary care, getting into the schools, figuring out how we talk to kids about substance use. We have to find a solution to this. It's unacceptable. It is the tragedy that Mr. Sword and his family have experienced is not something we want any family to experience. And we know how important it is to be addressing problems, to be supporting youth when they are experiencing anxiety, or disordered eating, or mental health issues when they're young, because we know that the consequences, if we don't intervene, are very drastic.
And we're confident, you're confident that care will be there when those young people need it?
That is what we are working so hard every day to make sure that care is there.
I'm really glad to have the chance to talk to you about this. This is incredibly important in your province, but right across this country. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Jennifer Whiteside is British Columbia's Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.